There is a document, a very old document, that circulates among the elder species of this galaxy. It has no official title. Most who receive it call it simply the warning. It arrives without sender information, without timestamp, without any indication of who wrote it or when. It just appears in your data archives, one cycle, as if it had always been there. The Veth received it approximately 400 years before the incident. They read it, filed it under unverified xenological speculation, and forgot about it entirely. The Dorahai received it roughly 2 centuries later. Their High Council reviewed it, laughed so hard that Councillor Prin actually fell off his elevation disc, which, for a species that hovers using biogenerated magnetic fields, is quite an achievement, and they archived it under obviously fabricated. The Sulkai received it, took it seriously for about 3 days, then received a very sternly worded communique from the Veth calling them alarmists, and quietly filed it away. I received it on the morning of what would become the worst day of my diplomatic career. My name is Orvath-Sehn, Senior Attaché of the Galactic Concord, representing the Mirak Collective in all matters pertaining to newly catalogued civilizations. I have held this position for 63 years. In that time, I have made first contact with 11 species. I have brokered 4 treaties, dissolved 2 wars before they properly started, and once talked a Dorahai admiral out of bombarding a planet simply because the locals had painted their communication towers in a color the admiral found personally offensive. I am, by any reasonable measure, very good at my job. None of that prepared me for the humans. The warning document was 11 pages long. The first page was a straightforward advisory, something like, "Approach with caution. These beings are not like others you have encountered." Standard language. The kind of language we use for species with unpredictable biochemistry or territorial aggression patterns. I skimmed it. I should not have skimmed it. The second page was where it started getting strange. The author, whoever they were, described humans as paradoxically fragile and catastrophically resilient, which is not a phrase that makes immediate logical sense. They described human biology as an exercise in biological contradiction. Beings that bleed easily, break bones without significant force applied, succumb to temperature extremes faster than most Category 2 organisms. And then the author used a phrase I had not encountered in any xenological literature before. They said humans had an irrational, almost offensive refusal to die. I remember setting the document down at that point and making myself a cup of warm Veth broth because I thought perhaps I was still half asleep and misreading things. I was not misreading things. Page 3 contained the first account. A species called, and the phonetic rendering here is approximate, the Crethon, who apparently encountered a small human vessel approximately 600 years ago in what we now call the Outer Scatter. The Crethon, being a moderately advanced civilization with respectable military capability, observed the human vessel enter their territory, attempted to communicate, received what they described as a cheerful and entirely unintimidated response, and then, when communication broke down, fired a standard yield warning shot across the human vessel's path. The human vessel fired back, not a warning shot, a full response, from a vessel that, by Crethon assessment, should not have been capable of that yield. The Crethon, naturally alarmed, escalated. What followed was, according to the account, a 40-minute engagement that ended with the Crethon fleet, 17 vessels, retreating from a single human ship that was, by all external assessment, actively on fire throughout the encounter. The human vessel was still functional when the Crethon left. They could hear the humans on the communication channel the entire time. Apparently, the humans were laughing. I remember closing the document at this point and sitting very quietly for a moment. Then I opened it again, because I am a professional, and I read the rest. The accounts varied in their specifics but were consistent in their broader shape. A human vessel or group encountered in circumstances of either exploration or conflict, performing in ways that defied biological and technological expectation. A human team cut off from support on a hostile world, surviving for 300 days on a planet that should have killed them in 30. A human negotiator, taken prisoner by a species twice their physical size, escaping through what the guards described as an almost supernatural degree of patience, followed by a sudden and very alarming amount of violence. A human colony, bombed from orbit 3 times, rebuilding faster than the bombardment could meaningfully suppress, and running through all of it this thread. This strange, maddening thread that every account mentioned, but none of them could quite explain. The humans in every situation, regardless of how badly it was going, regardless of how clearly the odds were arranged against them, they did not seem to process the concept of "this is unwinnable" the way other species did. Other species, when faced with sufficient hopelessness, recalibrate. They retreat, they surrender, they find an alternative. It is rational, it is survival. Humans, the document suggested, were operating with a different definition of survival entirely. I forwarded the document to my colleague Pressa Tal, who handles psychological xenology for the Concord. She sent back a 3-word response: "This cannot be real." I sent back the Krathon account with the notation of a 17-vessel fleet retreating from a burning ship crewed by laughing occupants. She did not respond for 2 days. When she did, she said only, "I need to see one of these things before I believe any of this." As it turned out, she would not have to wait long. The Concord had been monitoring the human home system. 3rd planet, a single large moon, unremarkable star, for approximately 40 years at that point. They were not yet aware of us. Their technology was advancing at a rate that our models described as aggressive, which is a word our models use when the rate of advancement defies standard projection. 40 years prior, they had barely achieved orbital capability. Now they had 3 functioning off-world installations, a deep-range detection array that our analysts found slightly unnerving in its sensitivity, and no fewer than 6 different active programs aimed at achieving faster-than-light travel. 6. Most species develop one approach and refine it. The humans were pursuing 6 simultaneously, apparently on the working theory that at least one of them would pan out, and in the meantime, why not run all of them and see what happened? Our analysts described this as inefficient. Our analysts had clearly not read the warning document. The decision to make formal contact was not mine alone. It went through the full Concord review process, which involves approximately 40 committees, 212 procedural votes, and a great deal of what I privately call diplomatic throat clearing, meaning everyone says essentially the same thing in slightly different words until everyone is satisfied that they have been heard. The final authorization came through on a morning that I remember clearly because the light through my office viewport had a particular quality to it. Amber, almost warm, the kind of light that makes you feel briefly that things are going to go well. I assigned the contact team myself. Pressa Tal would come as psychological observer. Dur, my communications specialist, who speaks 17 languages and has a gift for rapid phonological adaptation. Yesik Rowe, my security attaché, a Dor-High ex-military officer who I trusted absolutely and who had assured me on multiple occasions that nothing in the known galaxy could surprise her anymore. And Fen, my junior attaché, 22 years old, first contact assignment, theoretically along to observe and learn. We approached the human system in a Concord diplomatic vessel, white hull, standard neutrality markings, broadcasting in open frequencies in a range we had determined the humans could detect. Their deep-range array picked us up approximately 9 hours before we reached the outer planets. We know this because their communication traffic spiked sharply, and then, after about 40 minutes, leveled off into what our systems characterized as organized response pattern. They had decided something. We could not tell what. Dur established initial contact 3 hours out. The first human voice that came through the channel was calm, professional. A woman, from the phonological register, with an accent our translation systems needed approximately 4 seconds to calibrate on. She identified herself as Commander Adiaze Obi of the United Earth Contact Division, which apparently they had established 6 years prior because they had been expecting this moment for some time and had prepared for it. I found this simultaneously reassuring and slightly unnerving. "Unidentified vessel," she said. "You are approaching Earth space. Please confirm your intentions and species of origin. We are ready to receive." We are ready to receive. 6 years of preparation, an entire division. I remember glancing at Pressatal at that moment, and she looked back at me with an expression that said, quite clearly, "I think we should have read that document more carefully." I introduced myself. Commander Obi responded with perfect diplomatic courtesy, introduced her team on her end. I remember the names. A Lieutenant Bay Koruma at Communications, a doctor, Ingrid Vostal, from what the humans called their Xenobiological Assessment Team. I did not ask what assessing us biologically involved, and I stand by that decision. And an Admiral Ciro Delacroix, who said very little but whose presence on the channel was notable, because admirals do not attend first contact communications unless they are prepared for the communication to go in a direction that requires an admiral. We agreed to a meeting. Neutral ground, their suggestion. They proposed one of their off-world installations, a station they called Meridian Gate, orbiting what they called Jupiter. Yesik Ro, my security attaché, ran a scan of the station as we approached. She reviewed the results for a moment and then said, very quietly, in Dorhai, "Orvath, this station has 12 times the armament of a standard Dorhai military outpost. It is a diplomatic facility," I said. "Yes," said Yesik Ro. "That is what concerns me." The docking approach was smooth. The station was impressive in a way I had not entirely anticipated. Large, functional, deliberately designed with what I would later understand was a very human quality. The architecture communicated capability without announcing it. It did not look like a weapons platform. It looked like a place where things got done. The distinction, I would learn, was important to humans. They did not like to display power. They preferred you to notice it on your own and come to your own conclusions. We were escorted through a corridor by a team of 4 humans in formal attire, with earpieces and very carefully neutral expressions. Fen, my junior attaché, walked beside me and whispered, "They're bigger than I expected. Keep that observation to yourself," I whispered back. "They're also watching us very carefully, while pretending not to watch us at all." "Yes," I said. "I noticed. Is that in the warning document?" I did not answer him, because at that moment the doors at the end of the corridor opened, and we walked into a room where Commander Adeze Obi was standing at the head of a long table, flanked by her team, and she smiled at us. A very human expression that their files had described as a gesture of non-aggression, though Pressatal had noted in her pre-briefing that it also, depending on context, communicated confidence, and in certain circumstances, something much closer to amusement. "Attaché Orvath-Sehn," she said. "Welcome to Meridian Gate. We've been looking forward to this." Something about the way she said it, easy, warm, entirely without hesitation, made Yesik Ro shift almost imperceptibly beside me, a veteran of 30 years in Dorhai military service, a woman who had described herself to me once as constitutionally incapable of nervousness. She was nervous. I sat down across from Commander Obi. I placed my hands flat on the table in the Mirak gesture of transparency and peaceful intent. She watched this, nodded slightly, and mirrored the gesture with her own hands, which was either a remarkable piece of pre-contact cultural research or an instinct so rapid and socially adept that it amounted to the same thing. "Shall we begin?" she said, and I thought of 11 pages. I thought of a burning ship and laughing crew, and 17 vessels retreating. I thought of an irrational, almost offensive refusal to die. I thought of 6 simultaneous faster-than-light programs, and a diplomatic station with 12 times standard military armament, and a contact division assembled 6 years in advance by a species that had been expecting this moment and had, apparently, decided exactly how they wanted it to go. "Yes," I said, and I had absolutely no idea what I was walking into. The first 3 hours of negotiation were, by any external measure, going well. Commander Obi was exceptional. I say this without reservation and with the specific professional admiration of someone who has spent 63 years doing exactly what she was doing. She was precise without being rigid, warm without being performative, and she asked questions that were so well calibrated, they told me exactly how much research her team had done before this meeting, which was, frankly, an uncomfortable amount. She knew our governmental structure. She understood the Concord's jurisdictional boundaries. She asked about the Dorahai-Mirak historical tension with a casualness that suggested she was not asking because she did not know, but because she wanted to see how I characterized it. I characterized it carefully. She smiled that smile again. Beside me, Pressatal was taking notes at a speed that suggested she had abandoned note-taking entirely and moved into something closer to frantic documentation. Dewar was managing the translation systems with the focused intensity of someone who had realized, approximately 40 minutes in, that the human's linguistic patterns were more nuanced than anticipated. And Yesik Rowe was doing what Yesik Rowe always did in situations that concerned her, which was sitting very still and watching everything. Fenn, my junior attaché, was watching Admiral Delacroix. Admiral Delacroix had said perhaps 11 words across 3 hours. He sat at Commander Obi's left, a large man with the specific quality of stillness that Dorhai military officers also possess. The stillness of someone who is not passive but patient. The distinction is significant. Passive stillness is the absence of motion. Patient stillness is motion that has not yet been required. He hasn't said anything, Fenn murmured to me during a brief recess, while the humans stepped aside for their own internal consultation. No, I agreed. That's not normal, is it, for their command structure? No, I said again. It is not. What I did not say, because I did not want to alarm my junior attaché on his first contact assignment, was that I had been thinking about Admiral Delacroix's silence for the better part of an hour, and the conclusion I kept arriving at was not a comfortable one. In diplomatic settings, silence from a senior military figure means one of two things. Either they are present for protocol and have nothing to contribute, which was not consistent with the deliberate way Commander Obi occasionally glanced at him before answering certain questions, or they are present because something in the situation has already been assessed as requiring their specific expertise, and they are waiting to see if that assessment proves correct. I was beginning to feel, with increasing certainty, that it was the second thing. The recess ended. We returned to the table. Commander Obi set down her notes, folded her hands, and said, with a pleasantness that I had learned by now to treat with enormous respect, "Attaché Orvath-Sehn, I want to ask you something directly, and I'd appreciate a direct answer." "Of course," I said. "How many other species in the Concorde know about us?" Pressatal's stylus stopped moving. Dewar looked up from his translation console. Yesik Rowe did not move at all, which was, paradoxically, the most alarming response in the room. I said, "The Concorde maintains records on all catalogued civilizations." "That's not what I asked," said Commander Obi, still pleasant, still entirely relaxed. "I asked how many species know about us, specifically, by name, as a subject of deliberate study and observation." There was a pause. "Commander Obi," I said carefully, "may I ask what prompts that question?" She reached to her right and slid a data tablet across the table to me. On it was a document. 11 pages, no sender information, no timestamp. The warning. I looked at it for a moment. I looked at her. She was watching me with an expression that, Pressatal would later tell me, she had classified in her notes simply as, "they knew," not angry, not accusatory. Something almost like the expression of a person who has won a bet they had not particularly wanted to win. "Where did you get this?" I said. It was not quite a question. "It arrived in our deep-range array archives approximately 6 years ago," said Commander Obi. "No sender, no timestamp. It was one of the reasons we established the contact division when we did." She paused. "We've had a long time to think about what it meant." "And what conclusion did you reach?" said Pressatal, which was slightly outside her observer role, but entirely understandable given the circumstances. Commander Obi glanced at Admiral Delacroix for the first time without it being in response to a question. A brief glance, a half-second of silent communication between two people who had clearly been through enough together that language was sometimes optional. Then she looked back at us. We concluded, she said, that someone out there wanted to make sure other species were either afraid of us or prepared for us. We're not sure which. We've spent 6 years trying to figure out which it was. Another pause, and then, almost gently, we'd like your help figuring that out. I will tell you something about that moment that I have never included in any official report, because official reports require a degree of professional composure that this particular memory does not support. At that moment, looking at Commander Attaché Orvath across a table on a station armed to a degree that still made Yesik Rowe quietly uncomfortable, holding a document that I had received and skimmed and underestimated, I felt something I had not felt in 63 years of diplomatic service. I felt like the least prepared person in the room, and the humans were not even trying to make me feel that way. That was the part that got me. There was no posturing, no display of leverage, no moment of, we know more than you thought we did, and now observe our advantage. They had simply placed the information on the table and asked for help. With the easy confidence of people who had already decided, 6 years ago, that when this moment came, they were going to handle it a certain way, and had spent 6 years making sure they were ready for whatever that way required. I looked at the warning document on the tablet. I thought about the Krathan, retreating from a burning ship. I thought about the colony bombed 3 times and rebuilt 3 times. I thought about 6 simultaneous faster-than-light programs. I will tell you what I know, I said. Which is, I should warn you, somewhat less than I would like it to be. She nodded. We appreciate honesty. The document is not of known origin within the Concord, I said. Several species received it. None took it seriously. I received it this morning and I considered the precise degree of professional dignity I was willing to sacrifice in the interest of honesty. I skimmed it. Fen made a very quiet sound beside me. I chose not to identify what kind of sound it was. The Concord has been observing your system for 40 years, I continued. You were not considered a priority contact. Your technological advancement rate was flagged as accelerated, but the prevailing assessment was that you remained well below the threshold of... I stopped because I was about to say concern, which was diplomatically problematic, and revised to significant interstellar capability. Commander Orvath nodded again, and this time the smile had a different quality. Not cold, not hostile. Just knowing. Our faster-than-light program, she said. Which one did you assess? I glanced at Dur. He checked his records. Program 4, he said. Folded space theoretical modeling. Initiated 11 years ago. That one's been on pause for 3 years, said Commander Orvath. Program 6 solved the core problem 8 months ago. We've been running test drives for the last 5. She said it the way you might mention that you had recently redecorated a room, offhand. Easy, completely devastating. Pressa Tal, beside me, made a sound that I believe was her attempting to remain professionally composed and not entirely succeeding. 8 months, I said. We kept it quiet, said Commander Orvath. We wanted to see who would come to us before we came to them. She paused, and something shifted very slightly in her expression, something that Pressa Tal later described in her notes as the first moment where she saw something genuinely unguarded in the commander's face. We also wanted to be ready, whatever ready meant. We weren't entirely sure what we were getting into. The smile came back, quieter this time. Still aren't, honestly, and that, strangely, was the thing that settled something in me. Not the capability, not the preparation, not the armed station or the solved faster-than-light problem, or the fact that they had read the warning document longer and more carefully than I had. It was the still aren't, honestly, said without embarrassment, without performance, just a person at a table, acknowledging that the universe was large and strange and they were doing their best. We stayed at Meridian Gate for 4 days. By the end of the first day, Pressa Tal had filled 3 data logs with observations and requested Dur's help expanding her translation lexicon because she kept encountering human emotional register concepts that did not have clean equivalents in Mirak. By the end of the second day, Dewar had established what he described as a functional working friendship with Lieutenant Kuruma, which I mention only because Dewar had never in 20 years of service described any working relationship as a friendship of any kind, functional or otherwise. Yesik Rowe spent the third day in a series of conversations with Admiral Delacroix that I was not privy to and did not ask about. When she returned on the evening of the third day, she sat down across from me in our shared quarters, was quiet for a long time, and then said, "He showed me their combat doctrine." "And?" I said. She was quiet again. "Remember when I said nothing in the known galaxy could surprise me anymore?" Yes, I was wrong. I did not press for details. The expression on her face was one I had never seen there before, a specific combination of respect and wariness that on a Dora ex-military officer of her caliber amounted to something close to awe. I thought about an irrational, almost offensive refusal to die. I thought about the burning ship. I did not press for details. On the fourth day, we signed the preliminary framework for what would become the first formal treaty between humanity and the Galactic Concord. Commander Obi signed for humanity. I signed for the Concord. Admiral Delacroix witnessed it without comment, which I had by then come to understand was his version of approval. Dr. Vastal, the xenobiologist, shook my hand afterward, a human physical contact gesture that I had been briefed on but which is, I will say, more startling in practice than in briefing. Sehn, my junior attaché, was photographed alongside Lieutenant Kuruma for what the humans called a commemorative image, and he wore an expression of barely contained amazement that I found, honestly, quite appropriate for the occasion. As we departed, pulling away from Meridian Gate, watching the station recede through the viewport, still armed, still quietly formidable, still looking rather more like a place where things get done than a weapons platform, I found myself thinking again about the warning document, about whoever had written it and distributed it to species across the galaxy without sender information or timestamp, decades or centuries in advance of any of us making contact with humanity. They had not been trying to frighten us, I had concluded by then. They had not been trying to prepare us against humans. They had been doing something stranger, and in retrospect, something rather kinder than it first appeared. They had been preparing us to take humans seriously before we met them. They had been trying to prevent exactly the kind of casual underestimation that had led me to skim 11 pages that I should have read with the full attention they deserved. They had been trying to give us enough respect for the species at that table that we would approach the meeting as equals rather than as observers cataloging a lesser civilization. Whether it had worked, I was not entirely sure. I had still skimmed the document. The Veth had filed it under speculation. The Dorai had laughed until their counselor fell off his elevation disc. But we were leaving with a treaty. We were leaving with Pressa Tal's 3 data logs, and Dewar's functional working friendship and Yesik Rowe's expression of complicated awe. We were leaving with the knowledge that humanity had a functional faster-than-light drive, an extensively armed diplomatic station that they called, with magnificent understatement, Meridian Gate, and a contact division that had been quietly ready for 6 years, waiting without impatience. Sehn came and stood beside me at the viewport as the station shrank behind us. "So," he said, "first contact." "Yes," I said. "It went well." I thought about the burning ship. I thought about ready to receive. I thought about Commander Obi's smile and Admiral Delacroix's silence and the warning document sitting on a tablet between us, like a shared secret. "It went well," I said. "I think that is the correct assessment. Are you going to read the warning document properly now?" "I read it on the second night," I said. "All 11 pages." Sehn nodded slowly. "We watched Meridian Gate until it was a point of light among many." "Should we have been more scared?" he asked. I considered this for a long moment. A fair question. A genuinely interesting question. "No," I said finally. "I think we should have been more impressed. There is a difference. Fear makes you cautious. Impression makes you careful. With humans..." I paused. "With humans, careful is what you want to be." He thought about that. The Krathen were scared. "Yes," I said. And they retreated from a burning ship. He looked at me. What would the humans have done if we had retreated? I almost said I don't know, which was the honest answer. Instead, I thought about Obi's smile and Delacroix's patience, and a contact division assembled 6 years in advance for a meeting that had not yet happened. Come after us, I said. Eventually, politely at first, then less politely. I turned from the viewport. The warning was not about danger, Fen. It was about the cost of making them feel ignored. He absorbed this. Then, after a moment, "Who do you think wrote it?" I had been thinking about this for 4 days. I had not reached a satisfying answer. The document had no origin. No species in the Concord claimed it. No archive had a record of its creation. It had simply appeared, everywhere, over centuries, patient and unsigned, like a message from something that had seen this before, and was trying to save everyone involved a great deal of unnecessary trouble. Someone who had already met them, I said, and survived it, and wanted to make sure everyone else had the best possible chance of doing the same. I left the viewport. Behind us, Meridian Gate was already indistinguishable from the stars. The warning had been ignored by the Veth, mocked by the Dorai, set aside by the Sulkai, skimmed by me, on the morning of the most consequential meeting of my career. And here is what I know now, standing on the other side of it, with a treaty in the archive and humanity about to step, quietly, prepared, thoroughly armed, and entirely ready, into the wider galaxy. The warning was right about everything, every single word of it. The fragility and the resilience, the biology that should not work and does, the absolute, unshakable, almost cosmically unreasonable refusal to accept an outcome they have not chosen. The only thing the warning got wrong was the framing. It called itself a warning. It should have called itself an introduction, because the thing about humans, the real thing, the thing underneath all the ships and the weapons and the 6 simultaneous faster-than-light programs, is that they wanted to meet us. They had been waiting and preparing and watching that same wide dark sky that we had been watching, hoping it would deliver exactly what it eventually did. We just did not realize, until we were already sitting across the table from them, that they had been hoping for something to find them. And now, something had. Whether the rest of the galaxy was ready for that is frankly not my problem anymore. It is humanity's. Good luck to all of us.